I'd like to welcome you to our Wednesday speaker, sponsored by the Friends of the Montana Historical Society. My name is Becca Cole, and I'm standing in for Judy Dorsch, our Friends president, who wasn't able to be with us today. And it's my honor to introduce our speaker. Brian D'Ambrosio moved here in 2000 and started his Montana life as a newspaperman in Missoula. Brian is the author of 5 books and over 200 articles related to Montana, including Warrior in the Ring, a biography of Marvin Camel, a half-Indian, half-black pinball mechanic who went from a Montana reservation to win world boxing titles. You'll also remember a while back Brian gave a fascinating talk here at the Society about Shot in Montana, his book covering the Big Sky Cinema. Currently, Brian lives in Helena and writes for a diverse array of publications, from USA Today and the Smithsonian to Backpacker Magazine and Western Horseman. Today, Brian will be speaking about a century of prominent entertainment personalities with roots in Montana from his latest book, Montana Entertainers, Famous and Almost Forgotten. Please join me in welcoming Brian D'Ambrosio.
Yay. Well, thank you. Thank you again for having me and welcoming me and letting me be a part of this beautiful afternoon. So I have a tendency to speak very low, so if you have a problem hearing me, just tell me to pipe up a little bit, okay? How's the volume? Everybody can hear me? Okay. So, initially I was just going to do a little reading and pull out a book and do a little talking and stand here, but I thought the images would actually speak for themselves, and I just wanted to share with you while we have the time just some of the vivid, kind of interesting people I've had the opportunity to come across and discover on my own and perhaps rediscover and to share with everyone. So if there's a familiar face in here, I guess you could kind of let me know if you recognize any of these faces or names, and we'll play a little game here as far as like the famous and almost forgotten. Does anybody recognize the name Jack Pajan? So one person? See, I knew it, see? So Jack, this is on the forgotten end of things. So Jack was part Native and part Irish, and he came from Silver Bow County, and he went on to become a stuntman in a lot of movies, a lot of silent movies. And Jack over here is in this great still. Jack ended up also becoming kind of a mid to upper tier movie actor in the 20s and 30s. And a lot of these folks, there's very little information about, even some of them who were quite famous at one period and one point or juncture in time. After they died, there was, just maybe about a column inch of an obituary copy, and sometimes even less than that. So when we're dealing with people like Jack, anything related to even his birth date is sort of a mystery. And a lot of these folks just left even at their most revealing, they leave only clues. So Jack is just one of the on the forgotten side, unfortunately. So there were famous and forgotten. There were people who were not so quite famous and have been forgotten, and there are people who are famous and will be unforgotten. So, but there's a couple little subcategories that I guess we could work with here. But Jack kind of interested me because looking into him, when you go about go on eBay, which is a great tool to find collections of photos and postcards and memorabilia of forgotten movie stars or forgotten singers and musicians. So I found a whole bunch of prints online, and I'd find cabinet cards or old arcade cards of different silent film stars. And there's a box of them on the table. You're more than welcome to take a peek at them after we're done. So and it's interesting that a lot of the cowboy stars, quote unquote, from the early 20s, like Jack, who were from Montana, had cowboy skills. I mean, these guys were ropers, and they were the stuntmen in the films back then. They were the real deal. So, and Jack was one of those people. So, let me see here. It might be my cue to flip. Do you see that? That's a good one. So, that's what we're gonna do. Oh, here's another one of Jack. Yeah, here's one more still of Jack Pajan. So, does anyone recognize this woman? Her name is Fritzy Ridgeway. So Fritzi Ridgeway was an actress from originally, she lived in Missoula, and she also lived in Butte. And Fritzi ended up making several films. And I love this shot, this great postcard from one of her early films. And Fritzi actually found fame and fortune not only in film, but she ended up got into the hotel business. So she would have been what do you call it, a hotelier? Is that the right word? Is that how to pronounce it? And Fritzi could be a little bit of a turkey. Like there were multiple lawsuits against Fritzi, for letting her dogs run loose on her estate and on some of her hotels, and they were biting policemen, and she had a little rebellious streak. But I love that one. So Fritzi Ridgeway is another one on the forgotten end of things. So bouncing around, there's no actual order, to the photo. So you might see some from the 20s, you might see some from yesterday. So what I did was I tried to break the book down into categories or different subcategories, where people who were born, in the late 1870s, 1880s, and through the 19-teens were in one category, and then like 19-teens, 1950s, and then so I try to work the book up on where people were born. I did a lot of contemporary stuff. So one of the contemporary entertainers in the book is a gentleman by the name of Shane Klaus, who lives in Missoula, who's the owner of the Pink Grizzly. So Shane is a farmer, and he's a nursery store owner and a plant store owner and an arborist and a musician. So he plays country music, and he also is open for some great musicians, including Clint Black. So I thought I had some time and space to get to know a lot of people who were performing today. And one of the common threads too is just a love of their space and a love of their lives, and also finding balance. So Shane is a guy who I admire because he's found this great balance in his life between family and musicianship and his art, and also running the Pink Grizzly. So Shane's in there, and there he is right there. That's Shane Klaus. Now I'm going to have to rotate this one. I apologize. Which one?
Third from the right on the bar. It's right there.
This one?
Yeah.
This one?
Right.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's easier. Thank you. Thank you so much. This one's kind of an interesting one. This would be more on the forgotten end of things, and she's been so forgotten that I gotta have to read her section myself. So her name is Jane Drummond. So interestingly enough, Jane was born in Red Lodge, actually, and I could not really find anything about Jane in her life, but I did find this photo of Jane, which I had a chance to use in the book. So if you give me that's Jane right there on the right. I should probably explain that too. So we'll find Jane on page 121. Okay, so we've got Jane being born in Red Lodge in 1916. So she appears in a number of films in the 1940s, including one most prominently called The Fargo Kid. So she first appears on screen in this 1940 Joan Crawford film called Suzanne and God. So that would be her on the far right. But like I said, even the most basic details of Drummond's life are pretty scant, even simple, birth and death dates. But we know that she's buried in Bridger Cemetery in Bridger, Montana in 1967. So a lot of these folks could be their own, are their own sort of mystery. But I think it's a great shot, and again, great photo. And that's an actress on the forgotten side named Jane Drummond. So far, I think we're 0 for 4, right? As far as like anyone knowing people, right? This is good. This is really good. So thank you. Okay. Oh yeah. So this is I should have covered the name. Does anyone know who this lady is? Her name is Barbara Ludie. So the next time you listen to the voice of Kanga in Disney, Lady and the Tramp, so the voice would be from this lovely lady named Barbara Ludie, who was from Helena and Great Falls, and she grew up to become a voice of Disney. So she was also an entertainer on several radio programs. So this is Barbara right here, and I'll find a little bit about Barbara and tell you a little more about her. Does anybody know Barbara? Wow. So here she is. So it looks like, she is, again, a little bit of a mystery. Some of her accounts have her being a native of Helena and the family being well known. Apparently her grandfather was a pioneer here, and But what we do know is that her mom got sick when she was pretty young, and her nickname was Babs, and her dad died when she was also a baby. And at the insistence of an aunt, she nearly became a missionary, but became an entertainer instead when nuns at the Ursuline convent in Great Falls discovered that she was gifted with a voice of remarkable range and beauty. So, apparently she also started raising funds at the Red Cross as a little girl, you know, one of the bell ringers, like singing patriotic songs and passing around the hat. So that's Barbara right there. So what happens is Barbara signs a motion picture contract with Fox Film, and this is her obituary. Yeah, I've been working on a book about murders, so for the next book. So I apologize. You know, that was an accident. I meant her biography. This is from the Fox Film Corporation. This is her biography. Barbara Ludie, the child who is credited with raising more money for Red Cross activities in 1918 than any other person of her sex in Montana, is soon to be a tuned performer in the movies, according to word received from Hollywood. So Barbara ends up, you know, moving to St. Louis. She gets other tryouts, and she ends up becoming a great radio performer. So some of her more well-known films, and was for her voiceover work for Disney, including Lady and the Tramp, Merriweather and Sleeping Beauty in 1959, and Kanga in the Winnie the Pooh shorts, you know, and television productions in 1960s and 1970s. So there's Barbara Ludie, who again might be on the forgotten end of things too, right? So I've also, Norma Ashby, you know, one of the, you know, who gets her own little spot in there in her photo too, you know, who has been a great entertainer in Montana for so many years. So, ta-da! Okay, of course, there he is. Yeah. Now, isn't that a great shot? So, you know, the interesting thing about Gary Cooper, and one of the interesting things is that I didn't realize that there were so many next Gary Coopers. Like, one of the big thing was, who's going to be the next Gary Cooper? And a lot of the next Gary Coopers, this is what I love, they were from Montana. There was a guy named Lane Chandler, who people might know, who was heralded as the next Gary Cooper, who went to Helena High School and was good buddies with Gary Cooper. The two of them were rafting guides in Yellowstone at one point. So when Gary Cooper ended up in Hollywood, Lane Chandler followed him out. And Lane Chandler had a great career, a steady career in Westerns and a lot of Western films. But Robert Bray, who's also from Montana, who was an actor who found some success in Mike Hammer productions, you know, the Mickey Spillane character in the Mike Hammer series. Robert Bray, too, you know, was from Kalispell, and he was billed as the next Gary Cooper. So I don't think Gary Cooper's, you know, stature or importance or significance, you know, can be understated. So, but I like the fact that a lot of the next Gary Coopers, they came from here too, you know. So this is an interesting story. So Misty Upham, who is an actress right here, seen with Benicio del Toro in a film that was shot in Montana called Jimmy P, The Psychotherapy of a Plains Indian. It's a true story about a Blackfeet soldier and his relationship with a French psychotherapist after World War II. Misty, you know, was born and raised in Montana, and she ended up working as a housemaid and doing a lot of stoop labor and what would be considered menial jobs. And she was discovered as an actress, and she got a couple of small bit parts and bigger roles. But Misty had some mental health issues, and she was found in a ravine in Seattle a couple years ago. You know, probably most likely a suicide. But does anybody remember Misty Upham or Misty Upham? So, as an aside, I interviewed Misty, you know, for about 3 or 4 hours several years ago when I was working on a book called Warrior in the Ring about the life of boxer Marvin Camel. And in those 3 hours or 3 or 4 hours, Misty had hinted that her time on this planet was going to be very short, and it wasn't going to be, and she made intimations of, you know, and hints of perhaps, you know, taking her own life. And the interviews also hinted at some of the abuse that had taken place in her life growing up and some of the trauma that she had suffered and she endured. So, right after she had died, I was contacted by someone from People magazine who wanted to know about the audio recordings and what was in them and what, because and I told them, and I didn't tell them what was in there. I told them that the audio recordings that that I've destroyed them, which I have, because I didn't think it was anybody's business. But afterwards, there were a lot of people coming out from different places, from TV shows and different radio shows, wanting to know like what Misty had said in those 3 hours. But from that point, just to protect some of her integrity, I've since destroyed all the tapes. But I have an eerie sort of connection and interest in Misty. And I remember calling someone right afterwards. It was just a really strange wind coming through the house after we talked. And she was really beautiful. And on the interviews, too, she would ask about, my family and about Sophia. And she would say all these kind and generous things. So every time I see her face, it triggers kind of a complicated emotional response. But that's Misty, and Misty is one of the entertainers and performers from Montana. So this is one of my all-time favorites. Okay, so the reason that I did this book was because there were several people in here who I have just been intrigued by for years and years and years, and this is one of them. This is a woman named Irene Lance, though. There's about 4 or 5 of them that I've always wanted. I thought about maybe doing a full-length definitive biography on, and then I think, well, it's going to be exhausting. And I know how my brain works. It's able to absorb and integrate copious amounts of information and data and facts and figures, and it works better when there's a lot going on, so it's more satisfied that way. So I realized that if I could do 70 or 80 like mini biographies and small biographies and run all these things concurrent, it'd probably be it would be better for me than focusing just on one single person or subject. But Irene was one of those. Julian Eltinge was another, and Taylor Gordon was another, and Steve Reeves from Glasgow, who've always fascinated me. But Irene, does anyone know anything about Irene? Oh wow, this is great. So Irene, reached the epicenter of fame as a designer. So she was so famous, and so well known in circles in Hollywood as a designer that she was simply known as Irene. Like it was like before. She designed clothing for films. Yeah, she designed all the wardrobes, apparel. She even had a boutique. She opened up one of the first fashion boutiques. She's from Baker, so that's why I always kind of refer to her as the fabulous Baker girl. And I think that one day someone's going to come around and do a very nice documentary or project on Irene Lance's life. So I went back and I looked in some of the older pieces of information. Like the old newspapers are wonderful. You ever look into an old newspaper around Irene Lance's time? You could see these advertisements for her parents' hardware store or dry goods store. You'll see like the Lance brothers and Uncle Lance, with the names, and the announcements are really wonderful when you look into Baker at that time. It says something like, Irene would have performed at this center and sang a song at this center, or she played this instrument on this day. So it was really fun looking into some of the old newspaper archives in Baker. But so Irene, wants to become an actress. She leaves Baker, Montana, and she gets a couple small parts, but then she realizes that, hey, I want to start designing clothes. So she builds her name into its own trademark. In fact, I'm just going to read you a little bit about Irene. Yeah, it's a great photo, isn't it? So, this is great. From Baker, Montana. I think this photo, about that, yeah. No, it's exactly the right time. So there she is. So yeah, because she's nominated, for Oscars for her design. Yeah, about the late 40s, I think 48. So, but I'll read you a little bit of Irene. I think this might be kind of fun. She was a fabulous Baker, Montana girl who built Irene into a quality trademark. Twice Oscar nominated for costume decoration and revered for her luxurious dresses, gowns, and day skirts, Irene Lance was one of the 4 graduating students to be part of the 4th class to receive diplomas at Baker High School and was involved in the entertainment at the commencement held at the Lake Theater on May 22nd, 1919. The Baker Sentinel noted, while the class was small, only 4 graduating this year, it is one the city and school may well be proud of. The war was the cause of the small class, as several boys who were seniors tendered their services to Uncle Sam and joined the colors. Interesting. So Irene ends up becoming, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, known for her decoration work. And interesting enough, I don't know, Hemingway once said that all stories, if continued long enough, end in death. So unfortunately, Irene's story took a little bit of a turn. I'll just read you that part. On November 15th, 1962, a few weeks before her 62nd birthday, under an assumed name, Irene checked herself into Hollywood's Knickerbocker Hotel. She went to her room and downed 2 pints of vodka. She purportedly slashed her wrists and then leapt out of an 11th floor bathroom window. She landed on a suspension awning, and her body was discovered later that night. A suicide note read, "I'm sorry, this is the best way. Get someone very good to design and be happy. I love you all, Irene." So the speculation, and this is that Irene was despondent over the loss of her only lover and the only person that she ever loved and cared about. And this is a tantalizing enigma here, because that person was always speculated to be Gary Cooper. So that was like the one love of her life, and Gary had broken off with her. But that's always been kind of the rumor. So it is tantalizing to think that both these folks had this, a Montana connection, and that could be a possibility. But that's Irene. She did beautiful work. That's not Irene. So, yeah, this guy I know nothing about. His name, I only found some pictures on an old Find a Grave page. His name is McCrory, Howard McCrory. And I know almost zilch about this guy. So there are a couple in here that I have to say just know little or nothing about. So some of these bios are a little longer, they're maybe a page or two, but some of them are about this big, and this is old Howard over here. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, because I've never said it out loud. He's from Boyes, Montana, Boyes. Yes, no? Yeah, does that sound good? Boy, yeah. I mean, this is good. Not only do we not know the people, nobody even knows where they come from. So this is why we're doing good work, aren't we? So Howard Stanley McCrory appeared in several productions in the 1940s as an actor, including Trail Street in 1947 and Return of the Bad Men in 1948. McCrory seemed to have lived an adventurous and rugged life, although biographical details are scant. Born in southwestern Carter County, there are numerous references to him as a Deadwood rodeo performer, and South Dakota was listed as his home state when he was inducted into the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Rodeo Hall of Fame in 1984. But photos of McCrory on the Death Memorial website Find a Grave, where this photo came from, include intimidating images of him posing as a boxer, on the ground as a Navy officer in Okinawa, socializing and drinking beer while wearing a native headdress, and in action as a rodeo performer. He married his second wife in Glendive in 1954. So, these are a lot of the people where you can pull up, they could be their own mystery. So, if we could start our own famous and forgotten detective agency, So, oh yeah, and this is an actress named Andrea Leeds, who was born in Butte, and she won an Oscar as well. She's an Oscar winner for a supporting actress. So Andrea is kind of an interesting name and face. So she ended up, she was born in Butte. Most of the people in this book are born in Butte or born in Helena. It's fascinating, right? So, and a lot of them didn't stay very long. So a lot of them, they had lifelong connections. They had short connections. I tried to keep the people away that settled here afterwards because they don't count. So, like the Livingston crowd, the movie stars that came afterwards, they didn't get any space. Andrea was born in Butte, and her dad was an engineer, and he was also involved in mining and minerals and mineral exploration. So she's born in Butte. She doesn't stay there very long. And the interesting thing is that some of the people retain like a lifelong connection to Montana, and some of them it's really short. Like Martha Ray was born in Butte. You know how long she lived in Butte? 3 days. 3 days. But I put her in here, and she has a really interesting story because her parents were from Montana. They were performers. She was born in a hotel while her parents were out performing, and they had a long-standing connection to Montana. So I spent a lot of time or devoted more time to Martha Ray. But Andrea Leeds, from Butte, Montana. There's a good shot of Andrea too. That's good. Isn't that great? So what I should have done beforehand, I should have went and trimmed all the photos, my personal photos out of here. But when I got here a couple minutes ago, I started looking. I had all these other personal photos, of kids and family members. So if anyone pops up, that's not a famous or forgotten. Although Sophia, who's a wonderful entertainer, and age 9, she'd love if her face popped up here, I think. So Christopher Parkening, classical guitarist, So Christopher was taught here for many years. Actually, he thought he was going to retire to Montana. So as the story goes, we get a lot of the idyllic version sometimes of Montana. We get the romanticized version. Well, Christopher Parkening is an antidote to that because he got here. He spent a couple years here, and he was driving to Pasadena to go back to go visit some family, and he hit a blizzard, and he swore that he would never come back again, and I don't think he did either. So Christopher was a classical guitarist, but Montana was a great source of inspiration because he was going to retire at one point, and then decided he was going to retire and fish and enjoy all 4 seasons. He came out here, he found a lot of fish, and he found 2 seasons, and he decided that that he was going to go elsewhere. But he did end up putting out some great music that he derives, that was derived from his time in Montana as well. So, and there is a star for Christopher has a star in front of the Ellen Theater in Bozeman. So if you get a star, I put you in there. Pablo Elvira too, the famous the singer. Who was Puerto Rico born, he's in there too because he has a star, and he's connected. So, oh yeah, there he is, right? So, need I say anything more? Charlie. I was in drove through Sludge, Mississippi a while back, about 2 years ago, where Charlie was born, and there's a road sign there. It mentions his family and where they came from. There are no artifacts, no building, no museum. But Charlie's one that, gosh, it's hard not to look at Charlie Pride and get a smile. And what I like about Charlie is that everybody claims Charlie or has like a little bit of a story, of seeing him at a joint or hearing his music on the radio Charlie's house, as I consider Charlie's house, 638 Piosta, where 2 of his kids were born, and he always retains like a long-standing connection to Montana too. In fact, he had said that he also had a house in Great Falls, and he loves to come back, and like we all we get sentimental about our birthplace homes or our homes and our children's homes. And so Charlie mentioned that the last time he was in Great Falls, he looked up the address and someone was backing out. So Charlie just pulled right behind him and got out and just said, hey, I used to live here. Is there any way I could come and check it out and take a look again? And the guy said, yeah, sure. So Charlie, how great would that be to have Charlie come by one day and say, so in my mind, like someday, how interesting would it be if we had, like Charlie Pride's boyhood or home open as like a museum, and maybe like a Gary Cooper location too, and had both those places opened as little sites that we could share and enjoy. So Chief Many Treaties, kind of another interesting person right down here. This is a little film card that features a guy named Chief Many Treaties, who apparently, had a little bit of clout in his day too. There's a couple articles about the chief demanding and imploring Hollywood to use more native actors at that time. But Chief, many treaties. I think there's another one. Oh, there's Christopher Parkening out of order playing the guitar. See what I mentioned as far as like Christopher being inspired by Montana. There's another nice photo. So, oh yeah, yeah, this is another good one too. So, Wallace Coburn. Does anybody know the name Wallace Coburn? Yeah, cowboy. Yeah, the whole Coburn family. Yeah, so the whole Coburn family, they're like a dynasty at one point in Montana, and Wallace was quite fascinating. Our first cowboy movie star was a guy named Wallace Coburn, and Wallace's daughter, that's his daughter Dorothy. But to get back to Wallace really quickly, is that Wallace actually had a film studio in Zortman, like in like 1916. So again, and I didn't even know about that until about a year ago. And Wallace also had a movie theater. I have a photo of it in here, in Malta, that was known to be one of the greatest or the largest sites for artifacts and memorabilia. So Wallace was a great collector of Western memorabilia, and Wallace was really good friends with Charlie Russell, but Wallace Coburn became a movie star. In fact, I'll read you like really a quick snippet on Wallace and how he was referred to in one of these newspaper clippings that I happen to find. But this is Wallace's daughter, Dorothy, and we're gonna give Dorothy, we'll get to Dorothy soon. We will. Oh yeah, that is a great photo. The Bison Motion Picture Show at Malta, that's the name of the place. This is from the Honolulu Star Bulletin in May of 1917, when they learned that northern Montana's original cowboy poet and movie star is in the islands, and this is how they refer to Wallace. Wallace D. Coburn, the original shoot 'em up, watch my smoke, whoopee coyote, cowpuncher, and movie star is in town. I mean, they dug him, didn't they? So Wallace was a writer and a rancher, daredevil, a bronco fighter, traveler, entertainer. And then Wallace had a daughter, and this is her right here. This is Dorothy Coburn. So Dorothy is born in Great Falls, and she eventually finds her way in Hollywood as in a lot of Hal Roach movies, Silence, and the accompany to Laurel and Hardy. So you ever watch the Laurel and Hardy movies and the girl gets the bucket of paint falling on her head, or gets her butt painted? I mean, this is the lowbrow Laurel and Hardy slapstick. Well, there she is. That's Dorothy Coburn. She found fame and fortune and had a wonderful career, palling around with these guys on movie sets and getting her backside painted. So, oh yeah, there you go. There's. Now, she doesn't look as happy in that photo, but there, yeah, another great image of Dorothy Coburn. So I think the fun part will be, maybe when you're up, early one morning flipping through the TV, and you might be able to find someone who had a connection to Montana in one of those late night movies, So double. Fritzy Ridgeway again. We saw her, didn't we? All right, these are two Montanans. I love this. This is one Montanan choking another. Does anyone know? I'll give you two names, like Kirby Grant. Sky King was. He was popular in that. There's Kirby Grant, who was the good guy, and then there's Ethan Laidlaw, who's the bad guy, who was from Butte. Now, I wish I had a photo of Ethan in the book that was really good, that showed his face. But Ethan Laidlaw was a prolific Western actor, and primarily as the outrageously stereotyped baddie, the bad guy. But in Kirby Grant, who was from Montana, he always had the reputation of he usually played a good guy in movies. So I found this photo of Kirby Grant and Ethan Laidlaw. This is an actress, and sort of on the forgotten end. Her name is Helen Lynch, and she was from Billings, Montana. And there's a nice little shot of Helen. Yes, sir. Yeah, Chet Huntley. Oh, there's me at Buddy Holly's grave. See, I knew there was going to be one that I ended up getting in there. And then Irene Lance, another shout out Irene. And, oh yeah, so we'll do, yes, ma'am. So, Jean Parker, had a connection to Deer Lodge. So, does anybody remember Jean or any of her movies? Yeah. Any movie in particular you remember? Any favorites? So there she is. So Jean Parker is born in 1916 in Deer Lodge. Dad's a gunsmith and a hunter, and mom reared 18 kids in that pioneer family that started out in Missouri and Iowa and eventually settled in Montana. But by age 10, she's in Pasadena. So there's Jean Parker. Lots of them. There's a good shot of Jean Parker too. So, this character here, you might not recognize him because he isn't dressed as a woman. This is Julian Eltinge. He was the country's most famous female impersonator. Julian found fame and fortune in the movies in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. He was a legitimate Broadway star. This guy, there's a theater, the Empire Theater in New York City. It was called the Eltinge. It was named after him. In New York City, yeah, he's from Butte. Yeah, he was born Michael Dalton in Massachusetts, but his old man came out to Butte, and some of the directories put him as a barber, and they list his occupation. But young Michael has a classmate in Butte whose name is Julian Eltinge. And Michael takes the name from a classmate, and he starts getting into theater, and he gets into dancing. And I'm going to read you a little bit about Julian, but this guy is just fascinating. So this is Julian Eltinge, and you may not recognize him because he's not dressed up as a woman. So I'll read you a little bit about Julian, because there's a real fun quote. This is Julian. Women went into ecstasy about him, the comedian W.C. Fields once remarked about Julian Eltinge. Men went into the smoking room. So women were his primary, probably his primary audience and some of his primary fans. So this one-time Butte resident, again, he becomes America's first famous female impersonator. I'll read you a little bit about Julian. A long-forgotten actor, the thrill of 1900s Broadway, and a gender bender of silent films, drag queen Julian Eltinge was popular in Butte, where he accepted his first theater position as an usher, along with several other lads, at the old John Maguire Opera House at Butte. During a 2-day engagement in Butte, at the height of his popularity, Eltinge noted that he was first bitten by the showbiz bug while he and his friends hung around the Caprice Hall, a dance hall and performance theater in Butte. My first ambitions to mix in the theatrical game were registered then, acknowledged Eltinge. So Eltinge goes on and he performs among kings and queens, and he's beloved among nations, and he's beloved at home, and he would come back to Butte and perform theater even at the zenith of his popularity, at the peak of his popularity. And Julian, it's interesting, like I said, there were theaters named for him in the Dakotas, in New York City. So this is just how large, and what a status and a presence that Julian had, and he commanded a great amount of attention, wherever he went. Right. Ruth Gordon, who was an actress, wrote this in the New York Times in August of 1969, when she was looking back on Julian's life. She said, Julian Eltinge, as virile as anybody virile, contributed to the gaiety of nations by playing fascinating widows more fascinatingly than if fascinating real widows played them. So there he is. So I was thinking, we could just talk a little bit, or I can answer some questions too, because I know I don't want to keep you all here for too long. So would you like me to keep going for another maybe 10 more minutes and then answer some questions and we can talk? Or would you like to throw out some questions and chat? What would you like to do? Do
you have any pictures of him in drag?
I do. Yeah, that's a good question. That's not him. Oh, hold on a sec. Okay, I can't leave you guys hanging. I turned this into a suspense film. Where is he? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Was he acting when he was doing this too?
He was
Being a personality.
he acting, yeah, and he had a strong and a solid theatrical background and theatrical presence. So he was serious. He was a legitimate performer, but his offstage life was always a bit of a mystery. He played up the tough talking kind of foul mouth, cigar chewing actor. Yeah, he didn't, and there was never any real revelatory piece about Julian's life and his sexuality. I think they just essentially left him alone, and apparently it was not uncommon for this type of exchange to take place in Hollywood, and for audience to be quite enamored of a male dressing up as a female. But but Julian, like I said, he had serious credibility among theater goers. But this is a guy again that was as famous as someone could possibly be. So I think we got more. Maybe we can just do a couple more if that's okay. Yeah, because we're only kind of scratching the surface here, and I didn't want to leave you guys hanging on. That would have been terrible if I just had that one photo, right? All right, there's Julian, and yes, we know this face, right? So, this is a great story. She was actually conceived here, and she lived here for the first year or so of her life. So Lucille's parents, her father Jasper was a lineman. So some of the lines that would have been laid throughout Anaconda, he had a company in Missoula, even though they were from Jamestown, New York. Her dad and her uncle were quite prolific out here doing the grueling, painful, laborious work of putting up utility lines. So, interesting enough is that Lucille, she would have been born in Anaconda, but the family decided that they wanted her to go back to Jamestown, New York, because that was customary, and that was their ancestral land, and it was common for someone to to go back where mom and dad were born or where the parents were born. So Lucille ends up coming back here, and she stays for about a year, but then they're moving around to all these industrial centers. So they're moving out to Michigan, and they're bouncing around from place to place. But Lucille Ball always kind of claimed, in certain interviews, that she was born in Butte, and there were times where apparently she would contact the Anaconda and Butte Chambers of Commerce and asking for information about the town and asking for information about these places. But I'll read you a little bit about her connection to Montana. You guys knew that too, right? Somebody? Oh boy, you guys, this is fun. This is really fun. We found old Lucille. Even today, I Love Lucy is syndicated all over the world, and new audiences are discovering the lore of Lucy's slapstick antics. Before she was Lucy, Lucille Ball was the dreamy-eyed and easily frightened child of a telephone electrical lineman, Henry Ball, who worked gruelingly in Montana for several years. Putting telephones through Montana was brutal, even deadly work. With its mountainous territory and relentless winters, the state required fortified nerves in its telephone men. So I found the addresses too. They're in the directory. So Henry's got the headquarters, and he's actually he was working also too with the Anaconda Copper Company, and so Henry lived at 300 Hickory Street and then at 120 West Park Avenue, both apartments that were, according to newspaper clippings, located on thoroughfares filled with the sound of clanking streetcars and the cries of street vendors, which is really interesting. So on the flip side, at least one of Lucille Ball's biographers went so far as to to blame Anaconda for her anxiety. She had issues, with, she was anxiety-stricken and nerves. But so I found this biographer who blamed quote-unquote ugly and commercial Anaconda as the source of the famous entertainer's, quote, lifelong issues with chronic nervousness and anxiety. This is from him. He goes on. He says, Lucy's first impressions of life were of the cramped, flat, ugly little town dominated by the Anaconda Copper Company's smoke-belching chimneys of blackened brick. The constant changing, clanging of the streetcar was the dominant sound of her babyhood. Her mother's tension over Henry's dangerous work was another feature that influenced Lucy. Throughout her life, from childhood on, she was extremely tense, nervous, sensitive, and vulnerable, filled with anxiety and fear. So, thank you, Anaconda, for Lucille Ball. But anyhow, Lucille Ball, it's true, she did claim that she was born in Butte, and she was always interested in the family history, and there were times where she would write to write to the Anaconda Chamber of Commerce and ask for details about the town and what it was like, and what it was like when she would have been born. So, and she always wanted to know more about the people who actually lived in Anaconda and Butte. So that really started even from the 1920s, 1920s on. So when Ball went to New York in the 1920s, that's when she started telling people that she was from Montana, and she continued to publicly state that she was from Montana, for many years after. So here she is, this unlikely candidate, the daughter of a lineman in Anaconda and elsewhere, would become the country's most famous comedian and truly a television pioneer. So there she is. So, okay. Ta-da. All right. Perfect. All right. So now we can talk. But, it is fun. I think it's every little character has a story. And so far, I haven't had the opportunity to talk about this in a public forum, but, do the slides work? Is that a good way to do it? Okay, cool. Because each one that comes up has their own tale and their own saga. So thanks, thanks for letting me come and spend some time with you.
A slide up there about Monty Montana.
He was next, yeah. In fact, this is the thing. We can't slight Mr. Monty either. There's another shot of Lucille Ball. That's not Monty. There's Martha Ray, who I said the daughter of vaudeville stars who briefly lived in Butte. And there he is. In fact, I'm going to show you one of my favorite photos in the book is Monty Montana from Wolf Point. His most famous trick or stunt was attempting to rope Eisenhower on Inauguration Day. And there is a story. You see Nixon's right there too on the far right. But there are, and this story has become kind of legendary over the years, but apparently Ike forgot to mention to the Secret Service that this was going to be a stunt. So, and as the story goes, Monty was only seconds away from getting, pummeled by some of the agents. So, but isn't that funny? But that's just such an amazing photo. Let's see if we could dig up a little bit about Monty. Did I say obituary instead of biography? Boy, so I've been working on a new project for next summer about unsolved murders in Montana. And I don't mean to dim the mood by any, but I was just telling you. So, and I've been doing interview after interview and case after case. So, that was a slip. So I'm sorry. Monty Montana, here he is. The man himself. Let's see if we can dig up. Okay, here we go. Perhaps his most famous exploit came during President Dwight D. Eisenhower's inauguration parade in 1953. One of his most popular tricks was to lasso an unknown member of his audience when he was performing. Monty either asked the president's permission first, or Eisenhower agreed to the stunt on the spot. Two differing versions of this tale exist. However it happened, Monty rode up to the presidential reviewing stand and tossed a lasso around the standing Eisenhower. Monty recalled in his memoirs that afterward a Secret Service man told him that, quote, If they hadn't heard the president giving him permission to rope him, he would have been a sieve. So the photo with Monty's rope wrapped around Eisenhower was on the front page of newspapers nationwide, and the photo here was taken a moment before the one that showed Eisenhower fully lassoed. So, you know, do you say lasso or lassoed? Okay.
Do you have a person named Ian McDonald?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. You know, let's get to Ian. Let's talk about Ian. Okay. Hold on. Oh, okay. So, yeah. Let's do a couple more, and then we should do. Yeah. We need. Yeah. Ian's all the Pippi. Yeah.
Well,
Who's
he's famous for shooting
he?
Gary Cooper and
He
High
is.
Noon.
He is, and he found his start here at the Little Theater in Helena, and he would come back. He did a recreation here, you know, when they had the anniversary of the town, and they did the High Noon celebration, and he's buried in Bozeman. Yeah, I really like Ian McDonald. I mean, from what I've seen of him, but
I knew him, well, I met him first time in the early 70s. He had Parkinson's,
he did.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And his favorite place every week is to go to the Parrot.
Oh, no kidding.
So he'd have chili and bolted or something
Uh-huh.
like that. But he was a very interesting man, even as an older man, and you wouldn't have recognized him from his earlier pictures. But my husband, who was at Carroll College, asked him if he'd like to co-direct a play up there, and he was just thrilled. Evidently, he was towards the last
Mm-hmm.
stages, but he was kind of lonesome for a little bit of theater experience.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we need to talk about Ian McDonald. His real name was Olva Pippi, and so we'll have to do an Ian McDonald tour. And really quickly, I can't skip over, Pert Kelton was from Sims, Montana, and Pert, even at age 3, her family had they were traveling vaudeville stars, circuit performers, and at age 3, Pert and her family, they were known as the traveling Kelton clan. They were in like South Africa and going all over the world. An interesting thing about Pert is that she was actually she was Jackie Gleason's first wife, Alice Cramden, on the Honeymooners. So, but Pert was purged during one of the McCarthy era. During the McCarthy era, when McCarthy was, besmirching, everyone without any credible evidence or without any evidence at all, McCarthy had besmirched the Kelton family. And she was removed, from the television show. And Jackie Gleason had to explain away why Alice Cramden wasn't Alice anymore, or why Pert Kelton wasn't Alice Cramden anymore. And he would come up with all sorts of excuses. And apparently this something had bothered him for years. He would explain away by saying that she was sick or she was ill. So years later, what happened was, Meadows comes in, for that part, and of course, the Honeymooners become an iconic part of American television history, but Pert Kelton is left out of it. Years later, after McCarthy era subsides and the stigmatization of McCarthyism starts to erode, Pert was invited back in certain smaller roles on the Honeymooners, but that's Pert Kelton. I think that would probably be a story worth mentioning too. Car is demolished. Dad is taking his final swings. Yeah, that's something different. There's Myrna Loy with another actress from Montana named Agnes Franny. But we'll get to Rosemary Bowe. But we have to get to Ian McDonald, Pert Kelton. Oh, there you go. Oh, there he is. Okay. Let's talk about Ian McDonald. If we can. There he is right there. There are a couple other ones I'd like to talk about too, but okay, we'll do Ian, give Ian McDonald, and then I'll mention a couple other ones that I thought were interesting. And
Noon, he had, I don't know whether his face was scarred or what, I just know whether he already had that and they were doing natural, not so much makeup
Mm-hmm.
thing, because it was a black and white.
So here's Ian. So Ian will always be remembered as Frank Miller, the fierce killer set to arrive in Hadleyville at high noon to take revenge on young, fresh-faced Gary Cooper in Fred Zinnemann's epic High Noon. So MacDonald was born Ulva William Pippi on June 28, 1914 in Great Falls. His name Ulva is an ancient Norse derivative loosely translating to Wolf Island. His father, William Pippi, was a Methodist minister who homesteaded in the Havre area. His mother was born in Canada as Sarah Ann MacDonald. Born in Newfoundland, Reverend Pippi came to Montana in 1910. He held pastorates in the Montana Conference at Chester and Shelby before World War I. In 1916, Reverend Pippi served as chaplain in Company C of the 163rd Montana Infantry Regiment, 41st Division on the Montana border. Reverend Pippi came to Helena in 1925 to become chaplain at Fort William Henry Harrison, where he served for 25 years. He also occupied pulpits in churches at Clancy, Marysville, and Wolf Creek during his many years in the ministry. He had 3 sons and a daughter, and there was one of them right there, Mr. Ian. So it looks like, going through some of the census records, you can see, where the family lived, and it looks like they lived at 400 Harrison in 1930, and you can see where he got his start. Looks like he started his theatrical career with the Helena Little Theater, and there's old little clippings and little additions where you can see different snippets of information about Ian. So the one thing that I thought was pretty fun was that they had yeah, you're right, he did have, he was starting to show the effects of Parkinson's, I think maybe by the mid-50s. I think his arm was starting to be slung low, and you could see it even in some of the films too, right about maybe the mid-50s or so. So I think he lost maybe mobility in one of his arms. You could see him nursing it in various scenes. So, but yeah, like you just mentioned, so there was a reenactment. Oh, so MacDonald continued to work until 1959. So when he and his wife Shirley Pippi returned to their Montana roots, the July 23, 1964 edition of the Independent Record previewed the High Noon reenactment and the city's celebration of its founding 100 years before. Pippi was a special guest at the reenactment, which kicked off at midday with the sounds of gunshots. So I guess he ended up moving to Bozeman, and I think he's buried at the Wilsall Cemetery. And I think it was either a cardiac arrest or the symptoms related to Parkinson's. Yeah. Ulva Pippi. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the last name,
Pippi. Yeah. He should have kept. Yeah, Pippi. Yeah. Pippy. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean,
I remember
that sounds like a great stage name, right? Yeah. There's an actress named Helen Lynch, who I was mentioning was from Billings, and there's a fun old clipping from one of these screenplay magazines where Helen Lynch was actually Helen Lynch. Fritzy Ridgeway had a different name. Some of the other actresses had different names, but where Helen Lynch was feeling quite combative over the fact that she had to, they wanted her to change her name up or spruce it up or enhance it or somehow make it a little more what could be perceived as more glamorous or sexier, and she wouldn't do it. She stayed Helen Lynch. So, but yeah, there's Ian MacDonald, and he is just one of the entertainers to come out of Montana, and yeah, it's nice to be able to share it. Yeah, to share some of these stories and some of these little anecdotes with you. So, thank you.